So recently, I've been thinking a lot about New Game Plus in video games, specifically in FromSoft games and Souls-like games. I'm a D1 From Slop Soul Slop consumer. I play pretty much every single Souls-like that comes out. I've at least tried most of them because I love that formula of game. And that formula of game spawned in a New Game Plus system into my life back when I played Dark Souls 1 for the first time, that I've noticed a lot of games, even if they're not a Souls-like, kind of follow the same New Game Plus formula if they end up having one. Now, despite my love of these games, I realized that I've never actually done an entire New Game Plus playthrough beginning to end. I always start them, and then I usually quit around 30% into the game. And I just thought that was strange because I'm always replaying these games, right? So Elden Ring, I don't know how many times I've replayed Elden Ring at this point. Lies of P, which is the best Souls-like, I've probably played 4+ times, but not a single one of those playthroughs was ever a New Game Plus playthrough. And I think the reason that I'm just so dissuaded from doing a New Game Plus playthrough in any of these games I love is because the New Game Plus system that's been implemented is so boring to me, and I think it's so bad for the most part. So the way that these New Game Plus cycles usually work in these games is the enemies get more HP, they do more damage, and they drop more currency, and you retain most of all your items. You usually lose out on keys and stuff like that. So it's a pretty bare bones system to a New Game Plus. It's good that it allows you to maybe explore new builds if your game allows for builds, or maybe get a different ending if there's multiple endings in the game, or even if you just want to experience the game again, you can jump right back into it. You have all your stuff, you're comfortable with your character, and you're ready to go. And all of that is great for New Game Plus to allow, but the only issue is that there's a competitor to the New Game Plus system right by it, which I think totally blows New Game Plus out of the water, and that competitor is just restarting the game fresh, making a brand new character. Making a new character with none of your old items is just, to me, by far and away the best way to experience a game again if you really like that game, because the character progression that you have in the base game where you're leveling up from 0, again, if it's a Souls, like, you maybe can't wield the weapon you want to use right away. You have to wait until you can level up your strength enough, or you have to wait until you can level up your dex. And then there's the game of, is it worth for me to be able to wield that weapon 2 levels earlier at the cost of I'm going to be getting one shot by everything, right? These are questions that really only get posed in the first playthrough, because by the second playthrough, your stats are already where they need to be. If you're doing a different build, you would have used the item previously to change them around. And for the most part, the leveling system as a whole kind of takes a backseat, because at this point, you're kind of hitting the point of diminishing returns in terms of leveling, to where a level's not nearly as valuable at this point in the game as it was, 40 levels ago, back when you're in the middle of the game. So I've never really seen an implementation of New Game Plus where it can match that level of progression you get in the base game. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I'll never want to do a New Game Plus cycle if I could just start a new character, and with that new character, experience that progression, which I like so much about the game, again, fully, with the levels, with the weapons, with everything, right? I do have to say, though, recently I've been seeing some positive additions to how New Game Plus works, in the sense of devs adding maybe exclusive items, costumes, maybe even exclusive bosses simply to the New Game Plus. So you can't actually access that in the base game. You have to wait until you hit New Game Plus to get those items or to fight that boss, which I think is great. I think that's something that a lot of these games should add, because it just adds to the replayability of there already being a lot of replayability based on the game if you're able to make a build or use multiple weapons. Now, I do want to say that there is one game that I've played which has a New Game Plus system implemented into it in a near perfect way, and that game is Dark Souls 2. So Dark Souls 2's New Game Plus implementation is way different than the base formula I said earlier of enemies getting a stat boost and dropping more stuff. Dark Souls 2 figured out a way to implement the New Game Plus system into the base game system, which I think is genius and really the best way to go about it. But also DS2's New Game Plus actually implements new enemies into the game, right? So an area that you're going through for whatever your 30th time all of a sudden there's new enemy spawns. There's like those red phantom guys that spawn in, and it could totally throw you off your first time going through that area and seeing them and being like, oh wow, this is not the exact level design and enemy layout that I remember. So if you're not aware, in Dark Souls 2, all of the areas are kind of sectioned off from one another in the fast travel menu. And when you're in that menu, you're able to use an item called a bonfire aesthetic to select one of these sectioned off areas and put that specific area into New Game Plus. So while you have that area as a New Game Plus area, you have all of the other areas in the game still in the regular base game, which I think is so genius, because something that you can do with this system is almost have your own boss rush-esque type mode added to any game that you're playing. Because if I beat a boss for the first time and I think, oh, that was such a great fight, I wish I could fight it again, I could just pop a bonfire aesthetic, turn that area into New Game Plus, and then go back and fight the boss again, which just works out so well for the player and gives the player so many different options of not only how they want to play the game, but for how long they want to play the game for, right? Because once you implement New Game Plus into the base game, the base game's playtime can vary drastically based on the person playing. Because look, some people are just never going to touch New Game Plus because they want to burn through the game one time and then be done with it. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that's a totally perfect experience. But then other people might see, well, I want this one item that's going to really complete my build, but it's only available in New Game Plus. So I don't really want my build to come alive once I get to New Game Plus, because this item's there. I'm thinking the Crystal Soul Spear from Dark Souls 2 is the main item that comes to mind, because you can only get that spell in New Game Plus from the Duke's Dear Freya. And it gives you the option to really flesh out a build in the base game, which, let's be real, the base game playthrough, no matter what, is always just going to be the best feeling playthrough. So you'd want the ability to fully complete your build in the base game. And I know that's a hyper-specific example. Most builds do feel completed by the time you finish the base game with it. But I just like having the option there. I think giving the player as many options as possible is the best way for these games to add replayability. Because now not only are you adding replayability by, okay, I'm going to try Dex build this time, but you're also adding replayability with, okay, maybe this playthrough I'm going to use a New Game Plus a little bit more to try to really beef myself out early game to make the end game bosses a lot easier. A lot of Souls-like games are so successful because of the player freedom that the games give you, to where you can try these different weapons, try these different builds, try these different ways of going about beating the bosses. And this just adds such a great layer of complexity, but without feeling overwhelming because it's so optional. Now, I don't know how the bonfire aesthetic system was received by the player base when Dark Souls 2 came out. I played that game when I was way younger on the Xbox with my friends, and I really wasn't paying attention to any communities of any video game ever. So to me, I think the system was a home run, and I've missed it, and I wish that the bonfire aesthetic system would come back. I don't know if the whole community felt that way. I don't know if people hated it, and that's why I've never seen it again. But regardless, based on what I said earlier about how boring New Game Plus is now, I feel like this system is just an improvement in every single way. And it's such a shame that I feel like New Game Plus has now kind of hit this point where, yeah, we'll throw in 3 costumes here and there, or, you know, a couple extra items, because I think most devs know that a lot of players don't touch New Game Plus. I'd be interested if there was a survey of who has actually completed an entire New Game Plus playthrough, or just the decision of would you rather do New Game Plus or start a fresh character, because I imagine it's over 90% either don't do it or would just start a new character rather than do New Game Plus. So just knowing that most people aren't even going to touch the mode, it doesn't make sense to do something like Dark Souls 2, to where you're going to put all of this development time into developing these new items, these new costumes, these new bosses, just for, you know, 90% of the player base to never even touch it. But that being said, I feel like at this point, people just have a negative stigmatism towards New Game Plus, as what I said before, that boring stat increase. And if we kind of moved in a direction towards New Game Plus offering a unique gameplay that you can only really experience in New Game Plus, or implementing it into the base game, people would be way more open to trying New Game Plus instead of doing what I do and just starting a brand new character every single time. So yeah, this is just something I've been thinking about lately.